is a very special speaker for a variety of reasons. First, we're really lucky to have her tonight because we were able to get her here through two grants, two different granting organizations who were very excited about her being able to come. The National Alliance on Mental Illness and the American Philosophical Association Diversity and Inclusiveness Grant. As hopefully you saw from one of the flyers, Reverend Dr. Jeffcoat is going to be talking about the concept of church hurt. So we're going to be talking about religious trauma, which is an increasingly important and under-discussed issue, not only in our region, but nationally. And so the National Alliance on Mental Illness really recognized that, saw that that was really important, and they actually gave us additional funding just to support Dr. Jeffcoat's visit here this evening. They've given us additional funding for the Lavender Library for some resources here, but once they found out she was coming, they wanted to give us more funding just to have her here. So that's really incredible. I'm really grateful to them for that.
I am too.
And the American Philosophical Association Diversity and Inclusivity Grant, we were really fortunate for the Lavender Library as a whole to be able to do a speaker series for the first time this year where we could really have a kind of sustained series. We had to get grant funding to help support that. We were only one of two institutions in the entire country to receive that grant this year. So the Lavender Library and Reverend Dr. Jeffcoat are we just feel really lucky that that was able to happen, that we were able to have a series like this, and that we're able to have conversations that are about really important, relevant, and of the moment issues. Y'all, if there are not enough chairs back there, let us know. We can go downstairs and grab some more chairs. There's actually some in the classroom downstairs. Do we need to grab a few more? You've got one? Okay. Yep. I will probably go as soon as I finish my introduction and grab more chairs anyway. I'm also super excited, not just because of all the grant funding and because of the space and all of the things that we do in Lavender Library, but because Reverend Dr. Jeffcoat has a deep connection to UCA. Many of you in this room probably either know her, have heard of her, have seen things that she had a direct impact on campus. She was a professor here for many years in different capacities. I won't talk about how many. In different capacities on campus, including teaching in the philosophy and religious studies department, and teaching in English, and teaching in history, and teaching in writing, and teaching in African American studies. She really taught in a lot of different departments on campus and touched a lot of different students in those ways. In addition, she was one of the academic directors of a residential college during her time here, and actually moved around a few times. She was joking about that earlier if you're here for that discussion. So she touched many students as being someone that got to live and learn and support the students when they came to campus, as soon as they came to campus. And it's really a fundamental part of who she is to do that kind of work with the community and with students. Additionally, she was one of the primary advisors of PRISM. And so she has been a foundational and formative voice for LGBTQ inclusion at UCA for much longer than the existence of the Lavender Library and our fight for it. And she did incredible work here to make sure that the LGBTQ community could get as much support as we could, even during times where it was something that we had to do in secret, something that had to be more invisible, something that wasn't as obvious and apparent. So I'm just so grateful to be able to welcome her back in a new capacity and with new leadership. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her and grab more chairs.
Okay, and I'm going to actually do my reporter, which I should have started already. Hi. So I am so glad to be back here at UCA. I love UCA. I truly do. It was hard leaving. I was here for 11 years, and I think that probably I have more office space count than anyone else here in its history, would be my suspicion. Because I moved around a lot. I wore a lot of hats while I was here, but it's just wonderful being back. I'm starting in all black here, but I hope I don't forget to bring in my different stoles and other just things that I've collected, because depending on the environment that we're in, we need to express openness. We need to nudge people forward, and clothing does that. And so I guess I may just start there before I get, so, stand up and mess up your recorder. So for instance, not just when I preach on Noah, but when I serve for St. Louis Pride or Tower Grove Pride, I wear this. And I wear this in my, occasionally in my congregation. My congregation is like many rural congregations, which is a blend of progressive minds and traditional minds. And we are trying to have loving and open conversations. And so this is one of the stoles that I wear. I'll mention in a moment, when I talk about my philosophical commitments, John Dewey is my guy. And community building. And so to walk into a church space or walk into a community as a pastor and have a stole that has the interlocking hands, that expresses the beautiful diversity of humanity. This one's also special to me. And my newest one, and folks, I'm the biggest tomboy on this planet, so I have no idea what you do with things like this. But I know they're supposed to be vaguely even, right? Let's see. But here's a fair trade stole, scarf, tablecloth, communion wrap, multi-purpose piece that is my newest. The UCC has a number of pins. And how many of you know but have heard about the United Church of Christ? Let's start there. A handful of people. So the United Church of Christ is different, it took me a while to realize, from the Church of Christ. So the United Church of Christ is one of the most progressive denominations, and I think at the leadership level, at the national level, is probably the most progressive. So we were the first Protestant denomination in the 1800s to ordain an African American male man. We were the first to ordain a woman. We were in 1972 the first to ordain an out-of-the-closet gay man. Far ahead of the curve on every issue. At the local level, it's more divided. 75% of the churches in the United Church of Christ are rural communities. And rural communities are, to a great extent, caught up in the divisions that we see throughout our nation. And it's very easy to become isolated in our small towns and assume that, our way is the way that the rest of the world does things, or to believe, well, I don't know anybody who's trans. It's like, sure you do. You just don't know. So it is very easy to get isolated. And so part of what I do in rural ministry is, as a kid, I'm a farm kid. I'm from Arkansas. Surely you can hear this, right? I mean, it's no secret here that, I grew up in OK, Arkansas, had been leveled. Does anyone have any idea where OK is? Yeah, it was leveled in the early 60s, 64, 65. All that still remains today is the church. That still has a handful of members attending, including my grandfather, mom and dad, a few others. But close to Tollet, Mineral Springs is where I did my early education. So just north of Hope, basically, close to Nashville. I'm a farm kid. I love farming communities. And so I feel the division in myself of those small town traditions that I love. And this recognition that there are so many people that are in the closet for one thing or another. You know, sexuality, gender identity, a million other things. You know, closeted Democrats are everywhere. You know, right? There are a lot of closets out there that people are in. And I'm a military brat, so at an early age, I saw the world. My great grandfather, who was a small town guy, never traveled much, but he is the model that I look to because I am somebody that focuses on one-on-one human connections and community. And what he modeled in small town Arkansas, I remember excited when we hit 1,000 people. We were uptown because we hit 1,000. Okay, that's the kind of small town I'm talking about. It was still primarily segregated. You still had very defined roles of this is for girls and this is for boys. And I was always angry because the stuff I wanted to do didn't quite fit the social roles of the day. But my great grandfather welcomed everyone to his table. Black and white, male and female. One of his dear friends was trans. Now, we had no word, in the early 70s. But my great grandfather welcomed everybody. And those are the things that brought me to the United Church of Christ, because that's what I see. 75% of the churches are rural, and there is a love for community. And the ideal of welcome, even when a particular congregation stumbles. So I'm going to be touching back and forth to my notes. But before I lose track, my touchstone tonight is I want to talk about religious trauma. How many people here have had religious trauma? Yeah. I think it'd be easier to say how many of us don't at this point. And what I've discovered is so many people who are in the church, who love the church, still face a certain type of religious trauma. And so there is broad healing needed. And there's a need for healthier communities. Now, this is where I start, putting on my philosopher hat a little bit, although a lot of people want to kick Dewey out of the fold. Dewey was focused. How many of you know John Dewey? A handful of folks, yay. John Dewey, Beyond Education. I have fewer of those. Dewey was his driving desire was the creation of healthy democracies. For him, democracy was an ideal that was political, aesthetic, religious. How do we live into our potential, and how do we create space for all of us to live into that potential? We still haven't figured that out. At any level, have we figured that out in our families? No, most of us haven't. I mean, we love our families. I love my family. Mom, Dad, when you're listening to this later, I love y'all. But there is just so many dynamics in place that cause toxic relationships, that generational trauma that plays itself out, and religious trauma is right there hand in hand with that. Because so often our family dynamics are tied to trying to present the right face at church, or trying to live into ideals that are based on a particular interpretation of Scripture, whatever the Scripture might be. Because, I think that most people here are either coming out of Christianity or still within it, struggling with Christianity. Judaism, probably a close second. But, all faith systems and all families have these sort of weird dynamics that play themselves out. So a few touchstones. Again, I want us to be talking about religious trauma and what it looks like and how maybe we can start healing from it and to intentionally addressing it at least, because so often showing up is half the battle. We don't necessarily have to get it perfect, but if we show that we're in the fight or in the relationship, that's a huge statement. We're in this together. Can we actually act as if we're in it together? And can we believe that we're in it together? So Will Durant, there's a quote that I go back to, and Will Durant he's dead now, he died around sometime in the late 80s. But a quote of his that I love: every truth tends to expand until it becomes a falsehood. We really tend to waffle from one extreme to the other. And so often we will, in our relationships, in our philosophical ideals, we'll push too far. Or we'll go from being all in to all out. And that isn't necessarily healthy for us to go to these extremes, but recognize, because so often we'll say, oh, that's a slippery slope, and we'll let go of the idea, instead of actually sitting with these ideas and figuring out what is a healthy relationship here. Understanding that sometimes when we first, whatever that closet might be, so a lot of times when you come out of that closet, you come out full of pain and fear, scared to death you're not going to be accepted. So sometimes what that means is that we come out of whatever it is in fight or flight mode. And sometimes that's hard on us and the people around us as we're trying to find our way. But it is a natural response that we do that because we're being driven by, we're scared to death. What if I'm not accepted? What if I'm not loved? What if I'm attacked? What if? So how do we honor people's feelings and not try to tone police them? And how do we in the process try to heal ourselves and hang on to those relationships in those scary, hard times? Because we go through a lot of scary, hard times and just trying to be with one another. So every truth tends to expand until it becomes a falsehood. Another of my touchstones. So I farm kid, military brat, philosophy person for a long, long time. And then I went into chaplaincy at UAMS, and that is an amazing, amazing program. But one of the pieces of chaplaincy is you sit with one another. Because if someone is dying, I can't fix that. And so often, especially a Deweyan philosopher, you want to fix something. Our society is broken, let's fix it. Our education system is broken, let's fix it. Teacher, my students aren't doing well, I want to fix that. Chaplaincy, you can't fix those things. But you can sit there and be present with one another, and you can care for them. And hopefully try to care for yourself. And so the phrase one of the phrases is, you are there as a non-anxious presence. Because everybody else in the ER, that was I spent a lot of time in the ER. Everyone else in the ER is anxious. And I think when we go into the world today, how can we not be anxious? We're in the middle of late stage capitalism. Where are we grounding ourselves in that? But when we're anxious, it just feeds on itself. And you get more and more anxious and more anxious, and all of a sudden you're doing something, I was telling Clayton earlier, Julie, you said something about, where do all the Karens come from? And I think it's from Sorry. But I think part of it is certainly there's racism and homophobia and all these isms inside of us, but we have no space around us. We are going 90 to nothing, full steam ahead, dead stop, full steam ahead, dead stop. And we're always late. And so in that frantic, I'm moving so fast I can't breathe, and the whole world is falling around me. What happens? What starts rolling out of us? Those worst buried elements of us. I think that's where a lot of it's coming from. We don't have space to breathe. That feeds into the trauma, right? Because you've got traumatized people ending up in the pulpit. And what happens? We so often take our trauma and project it out on everybody else. Until we do the healing in ourselves, there's a big, huge chance we're projecting that mess outside of us. And that's what that handout's about. Has become my meditation practice. When I start feeling whatever emotion it is, I ask myself, what exactly am I feeling? Am I angry or am I really embarrassed and bounce? Because see those boxes there? A lot of times when we're in one box that we don't want to be in, like ashamed, embarrassed, frustrated, sad, grieving, we bounce to another box. And the go-to box for most of us is anger. I think most of us aren't angry about the things we're angry about. We're angry about all the rest of that mess that we haven't healed. And sometimes I'll say, hey, I'm really sad, or I'm really this, and I don't know why. I flip on the other side. What need am I not having met? Am I lonely? Am I do I feel disconnected? Am I hungry? We all know I'm hangry, right? I mean, that's just a real thing. So, but how many of our needs are not being met right now? And I think for a lot of us, the need for acceptance is huge. And to the extent that someone is using religion to deny acceptance, that's doing real damage, deep damage. And until we heal from our damage, we tend to spread that damage. This is the generational aspect. One of the most powerful things that we did in chaplaincy is we did a family tree, all of us. And then we started putting down the dynamics, like how do mothers and sons relate to one another in your family? How do mothers and daughters? How do children and parents? Now let's put down any mental struggles. Let's put down any addictions. Let's put it all down there and see what patterns emerge. And it makes a stark statement in graphic form of generational hurt. Once you see it, then you're responsible for what do we do with it. But first you got to sit with it in a non-anxious way and say, wow, look at that. Because all of our families have mess, but we tend to not pay attention to it, and then it starts popping out of us. It's a meditation tool that I use. But it also fits our religious trauma because, again, damaged pastors get in the pulpit. So I have briefly, the other my brieflies last forever. My dissertation was on John Dewey and understanding identity in ecological terms. And the idea is our skin is a convenient boundary, but the reality is I am the air I take in. I am the food and water I take in, but I am also embedded within a community, and I am those community messages coming at me. And it goes both directions. So how on earth do we have healthy individuals when we are caught in a community that's not healthy? And at the same time, how do we have healthy communities when individuals are not healthy? So back to my little chart here, I think that's a tool for how do we heal from the individual out. But those things still work for communities because we acted almost as an individual at the end of 9/11. Everybody was walking around with "I am New York" or "I love New York" shirts. And just about everybody wanted to go and kill somebody. We wanted to help and hurt. And it was groupthink at a national level. And many beautiful things came out of that, and many horrific things came out of it. Because we weren't sitting in our pain, taking that time to be a non-anxious presence, because we were traumatized. We're shocked. We didn't sit with it. And we didn't say, how can we be intentional? How can we heal? Can we sit and wonder, why on earth might somebody have done this? What's the context of this attack? Because we don't look at the context of our own behavior. That's the genogram, that history that's pouring right through us. Whether it's history or where it's those cultural messages. I am all of this. Josiah Royce says to be is to be uniquely related to the whole. And so I am all of these community messages. And I'm not a passive recipient, but how often do we actually sit and look at the stories we're telling? How often do we slow down and listen to the stories that other people are telling and wonder, why on earth are they telling the story they're telling? What is their experience? What is our experience? We need that intentionality. And so that chart just happens to slow me down. Again, it's like, and it's helpful because the word that I almost never hear outside of religious circles is the word grace. We got to have some grace here. And sometimes when I have somebody that is just on my last nerve, right? Because all of us have those people, right? Sometimes I sit down and say, what's going on in me that this, out of all the billion things that could be triggering me right now, what is it about this one? That's the insight that helps me heal. But the grace is, I wonder what on earth is behind that person's actions. Why on earth would that person be doing this? And so I wonder. So if you look at my Facebook page, I list myself as a pastor and professional wonderer, right? Because I think that's part of how we heal, is we wonder. But what so often is we get the story in our head. I know what's going on here. And then we concoct this narrative that may have absolutely nothing to do with reality. How often do we lay awake at 3 a.m. concocting some doom and gloom sort of thing that never ends up happening? I've spent a lot of energy doing that. And there is only so much energy in this world. There's only so much energy in me. And that's part of it. We don't have grace with ourselves to give ourselves the space because we're going so fast, doing so many things, and most of us have an absolute inability to say no. So we're frantic to get to that person. We're already 30 minutes late. Told them I was on the road, and it was 30 minutes late before I got in the car. How many people have done that, right? So they know, and you're late, and you're getting later. So an explosion happens. So maybe that's what's going on. This is the good thing about people watching. Walmart is the best and worst place to people watch, right? because you see all of our foibles just laid out right there in the aisles of Walmart. But you learn grace by looking and wondering. You learn grace by asking. Instead of reacting, say, tell me more. Hey, what's going on? Boy, you look stressed. Want to have a cup of coffee? And just hear one another's stories. And a lot of times the story that's in your head has nothing to do with what's actually going on in that person's life. So, grace. So storytelling and listening, name the pain and touch it gently, because so often when you've got somebody in front of you who is struggling, if you can just say, man, I wonder if, and then just name the pain, all of a sudden that opens up and we're able to be vulnerable with one another. And I think vulnerability is a key to healing. And there is a lot we have to heal from. So those are some of the touchstones. So religious trauma. There is a growing amount of literature out there on religious trauma. And the way that I tend to think of it is that there are at least 3 different types of religious trauma. And one of them is family systems based. All the mess that goes on in our families, especially if it, how many of y'all came out of a church background? You know, good number of you. Were those small churches or huge? Small? Yours was pretty big? Yeah. I think you see it most clearly in the small churches where the family mess just rolls right in to the church mess. And you find out that 2 people that have been on church council for the last 9 years because nobody will take the role, and they've been fighting back and forth. You find out that in 7th grade, one of them got the girl and one of them didn't, or whatever it is. They've hated one another. I mean, they come together. They do good work. They do the dinners and they do the food drives and the clothing drives and all of that. But they get together and they just fight, and there's a long history that plays itself out. The hurt of a misplaced joke, and you don't realize, the pastor has no idea that what sounded to the pastor like an innocent joke hits one of those buttons, because we've all got our buttons, and most of them come from our families. Now, that sort of family systems dynamic, that's a lot of what I don't want to call it mundane, because it's painful, it's real trauma, but it's from these kind of everyday sort of events. Pulpit-based trauma. Have you guys been the victim of a pulpit-based trauma? No? No. When I was growing up, the scapegoat tended to be women who wouldn't submit to their husbands. The number of times I heard that one. Divorce is at the root of all of America's problems. And then something miraculous happened in the 80s. Women didn't get off the hook completely, but there was a new scapegoat. There was the homosexual community. And so you end up with a new iteration, a new flavor of a very similar trauma. But it's coming out of the pulpit. And this can be, I have a friend who left the church because her pastor somehow had access to the financial, the tithes. I see, hey, we took in this amount and here's our bills, and then you either go, yay, or oh no, right? That's the extent I need to know anything financial. I don't need to know. UCC does not allow the pastor to know the financials, who's tithing, who's not. So somehow this pastor knew and pulled us on my friend and said, basically, if you don't start putting more on the plate, you're not welcome here. Yeah. That's a very one specific type. Yeah, but it's leadership that is is traumatizing those. And a lot of times, in an attempt to be funny, again, telling jokes that are hurtful. All of the different attacks, undermining, there's a lot of bad coming out of the pulpit or various other leadership positions. And then what I call opportunistic religious trauma. And I think a lot of what's going on at the national political stage and in local fights, and again, this is me, but I'm right on this one. I don't say that often, but I don't think most of a significant number of these politicians care one way or another about those hot topic issues. They want to find something to stir up the base. And whatever it takes to get elected, they will stir. And so a lot of times, there is ample religious trauma coming out of in the pew family dynamics mess and from the pulpit and council type of trauma. But I think that so many of us who are being traumatized by religious language, it's coming from people who don't even believe it. They're just trying to get elected. They're playing power politics. And that's damaging small churches that are trying to provide a different vision. And in no way am I trying to convert or pull people in, right? I'm just talking about something that I'm concerned about here. And I think that a lot of people are being traumatized. So, kind of the usual, and I'm wondering if maybe there's a fourth type of trauma that, for any of you that have seen Gloria Yamato's, something about the subject topic is difficult to name. Yamato talks about 4 different types, 4 flavors of racism. And I think that can play into any ism you want to talk about. But at the basic is the unaware, unintentional. And that is, I'm not aware that what just came out of my mouth is racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever. And I sure didn't intend it. I think a lot of our jokes, I think a lot of statements that people make when they're just unaware. I think that there's real trauma being done by people who have no idea that what they've said is wrong or hurtful. And so I'm wondering if there's a type of religious trauma that falls into that sort of category. A little different than family dynamics, but I think that might be another type. I draw on Josiah Royce. Josiah Royce, again, he was the one to be uniquely related to the whole. I have a relationship with Jupiter. I can't do anything about that. But if Jupiter explodes, we're screwed. That's one of the letting go of control issues of thinking you've got to be in control of all your relationships. Recognizing I'm in a relationship with Jupiter, and that's just beyond me. A lot of our relationships are that way. When we try to control them, we realize how little control we have, and that's okay. It's, can I heal? And can I be in a healthy relationship? And what do I do if it can't be healthy? Do I leave? Maybe. What do I do with this knowledge? But we can't control it all. But he also talks about provincialism. And provincialism is this idea, and the unhealthy way is my way or the highway. We're right, you're wrong. It's always been done this way. You hear all these things in church. You hear this in family. The first family member where a divorce happens, the world is going to end. The third one, it's like, no big deal. So been there, done that. I think that's, to a great extent, any difference, because we're hyper-focused on difference as dangerous. And that's a problem, and hopefully it's something we can heal from. I'm afraid. What am, I mean, on my list, I'm afraid. What needs do I think might be undermined by this divorce? You know, am I going to be shamed by my neighbors? Am I going to, I mean, and I think that's one way to dissolve the anxiety is to talk yourself through that. Really, is anybody going to shame you for that now? And with all things, the first is scary, the third is old hat. But an unhealthy provincialism, our way or the highway, we've always done it this way. A healthy provincialism is a joy of your community without diminishing other communities, right? I mean, Mineral Springs, May Play, Dirks, or any of these other communities, and we can both be happy rooting for our team and hope for a good game. Joy of my community without diminishing other communities. In its healthiest form, it sees differences blending into something stronger. It accepts its own uniqueness without diminishing other ways of being. And so being a family that can sit with, wow, look at how unique our family is. Look at all the contributions by all the different people. Look at how our family is different than the one down the street. Can we be happy? Can we thrive? Then we're good. And can our community, made up of these families that are all unique and goofy in their own ways, hold together in a healthy dynamic? And when the bumps happen, because the bumps are going to happen, are we able to sit and say, we're not going to go off the deep end. We're going to think about what we're afraid of. What needs are being, shaken or maybe not being addressed? And can we find ways of doing something healthier? And so for me, we have a lot of unhealthy provincialism in our communities, in our states, in our churches, in our schools. The fights that Conway has been going through recently at the school level is appalling. And Conway's on loan. The stories. I had someone at a previous, not the church I'm at, but a previous community that bought into the whole idea that there are litter boxes in all of the schools. And so finally I was like, okay, who in the building has a relative on council? Anybody related to the principal, superintendent? Can you get them on the phone and we can just ask? Because this is a hoax. But this is not like we don't know who, we can see the school from here. We really can ask. So that's where the professional wondering comes. I wonder if anybody's got a hotline to the superintendent. Can we call them up and ask? And it's like, no, we don't have any litter boxes. It's like, we get him on the phone. Can you ask him if he knows of any school around here? Because the superintendents go to meetings with one another. So if it's going on, they know, right? I wonder if anybody, right? Can we wonder together? Can we ask questions? Can we have a sense of humor with it, even when it sometimes hurts? And that's the hard one, because the damage is real and the fear is real. But what we tend to miss is that, the community, whether we're talking about the high school or, the people that have bought into these hoaxes, okay, their fear is real, but the fear of the people that are being marginalized is real and terrifying. There are made up stories like the litter boxes, but then we all know the reality of, what religious trauma can do. So these churches have got to heal, and the leaders have got to heal, and be willing to take a deep breath and release their anxiety and hear the stories from the people that are being marginalized. And so the question is what do we do? Because I think that sometimes, was it just my high school? I know better. How many people said, man, as soon as I graduate, I'm out of here, never coming back. Mother's Day, Christmas, and Easter, maybe, right? But that's it. And sometimes you got to do that for your own mental health, your own physical safety. That's just real. And the reality is most of us don't. Most of us who say we're leaving, we don't. So what do we do in the meantime? How do we, as individuals, heal ourselves, as communities, heal ourselves? And how do we share stories so maybe the hoaxes, the overblown mess will be dissolved? And sometimes that's a podcast. To put a news story out there, being willing to listen to the podcast and way behind. But, how do we show up and encourage healing? Again, we start with ourselves. And then heal within the organizations we're part of. And so one of the things that I did, so I'm a pastor, and my church is not open and affirming. I don't know that it ever will be. In the United Church of Christ, we're bottom up. It's one of the reasons I love the UCC. It's progressive, and it's a bottom up. I've never wanted to be the boss. It's a very different understanding, because in some churches, the pastor is the boss. The congregation can fire the pastor, but that's it. Otherwise, the pastor is the boss. UCC, we have more committees than you can imagine. And there's a problem with that too, because anybody that served on committee, it take you a decade to get anything done. And I think half the decisions are just because you're so tired, you agree to anything if you could just go home. So there is a problem with a bottom-up committee, model. There's no perfect. But I am at the regional level, I am the volunteer coordinator for the United Church of Christ, for St. Louis Pride and Tower Grove Pride. Both of them are big, huge, beautiful, glorious spaces. And on day 2, day 1 I went and worked the entire day. I missed 2 hours day 2 because I had, I love my church. I want to be there on Sunday. I want to do the service. And I couldn't be at 2 places at once. So I was a little late the second day. But in my sermon on day 2, I told them, I said, I want to share a story. And it's a story about church hurt. And we all know someone in this church who was told, we've all heard the story of how she was told if she didn't start tithing more, she wasn't welcome. And that's the reason that she left that church. She was out of church for many, many years. And now she's here. And so that's one flavor of church hurt. And I want you to know that I am volunteering all weekend, with the exception of this 2-hour block, at Pride. And I know that many of you know, but a lot of you don't. And the reason, one of the many reasons, and I talked about communion and how that I served communion. And so it was just a simple, we didn't do the full thing. We had these little cups One of the pastors in St. Louis calls them Jesus Lunchables. Um, love the UCC. But I said, but one of the things I did was I served communion. I offered communion. And I said, a lot of people came up and they had been forced out of their church because of who they were. And most of the people who took communion did so in about the same way that all of us do. We take it seriously, but it's not like an earth-shattering moment. And I said, but yesterday, 6 people cried during communion because their church hurt was so deep that it was meaningful to have a pastor give them the blood and body of Christ. It was significant. Their church hurt needs to be recognized. And for me, that's how you start building. That's one way of starting the conversation that we need to have in our religious communities, is to connect. So Derek Bell talks about interest convergence theory, and there's a hard form, which is that the majority is not going to care one bit about whether minorities get their rights or anything unless they see it as in their best interest. So if it's in, pick your favorite least favorite corporation. If it's in their best interest to have a diverse workforce, they will be doing diversity stuff all over the place. But if they don't see it as their best interest, they won't bother. So part of what I do, I'm not most of the time quite that cynical. I really think Derek Bell's on something here. But it's like giving people a little bit of benefit of the doubt. We usually don't know. And we're usually overwhelmed when we do find out, because we don't have a lot of space in our lives. We're exhausted and we're doing too much and we can't say no and we're running 90 miles an hour. And if we can connect this to that, all of a sudden the light bulbs start going off. And it's what all of the teachers see with their freshman classes. I loved all the classes I taught. I can't think of anything I didn't. One will pop into my mind at 3 a.m. But the ones I loved the most were the ones that were in Old Main, where these were kids that so often had had somebody telling them, you don't belong in college. And seeing those light bulbs go off in those kids and seeing them become college ready. That was my favorite part, because we're connecting. We're building, so doing community building, we were building communities. It's one of the reasons I love learning communities. We are building communities. But so Derek Bell certainly influences me. In the back of my head is the cynical. People aren't going to care unless they can connect it to their own lives. But part of me is like, well, that's not necessarily cynical. We're exhausted. Can we bridge those connections? And so I think that's a role that we all have in one way or another. How do we heal ourselves? How do we make connections so that we can start healing our communities? And the idea is, if we have healthy communities, we're going to have healthier individuals. If we have healthier individuals, we're going to have healthier communities. I'm thinking of an old Darkwing Duck. The bigger the battery, the bigger the hull. The bigger the hull, the bigger the battery. It just gets better and better. But we get caught in this downward spiral. Everything's terrible. Everything's broken. Everything's against, and we just get sucked dry. So we got to start with the healing of ourselves. And that's why I have that. Self-purification, tone policing, and grace. Tone policing is just wrong. So for me to say, you shouldn't feel that way, you shouldn't say this, you shouldn't do that. How much religious trauma is coming out of somebody wagging a finger? You shouldn't do that, you shouldn't say that, you shouldn't think that, you're gonna, okay. But when we look at Martin Luther King Jr., and he has the 4 stages of nonviolent protest, number 3 of that was self-purification. And the way that I understand self-purification is that if you're going to go and into the dangers that his followers were undergoing and stay committed to nonviolence, you have to have something deep inside you thought through. Because if I'm marching and I've got grandma on one side of me and my spouse on the other, and the cops start beating down my grandmother, how am I going to stay committed to nonviolent protest? Because I want to kill them. This is grandma. It is just instinctual that you leap to knock whoever it is off of grandma. So the problem is if that happens, the folks with cameras are going to take a picture of you beating down the police officer or beating down the whoever it was that was attacking grandma. This is basic football, right? I mean, the person that commits the offense doesn't get the foul, the flag. The person that retaliates gets the flag. So if you really are committed, you can't damage the narrative. You've got to stay on target. So what do? You lay your body over grandma, you take that beating. That's a lot. Self-purification is going in and doing the work that you need to do to heal, to do the work, so your community is healed. Totally. So it's about what am I allowing me to do? It's very different than what I'm allowing you to do. That's tone policing. But self-purification is vital. And that's how we break those generational hurts. And that way we don't take our generational hurts into and inflict them onto other people, especially under the guise of God. Because that's where religious trauma is coming from. A lot of it is I'm daring to say this thing in me that I'm inflicting is actually God. God's going to send you to hell because of X, Y, and Z. Standing in the pulpit or on the street corner. So we self-purify. We don't tone police. I've got a lot of stories. What I want, and I want to get some feedback from you guys because I've talked way too much. But for me, we need community coming together to address each of the flavors of religious trauma. And that means we need skills and we need to be able to understand one another. So we're not carrying forward these narratives that are damaging. And there are mundane versions. I have a friend that every time her husband is 15 minutes late, she's sure he's cheating on her. It's like, no. But it's that narrative, that reach to narrative. We all have them, So we need skills. We need to hear one another's stories. It's too easy to downplay religious trauma. And it's too easy to be so consumed by our own pain that we don't recognize the pain in others. So conversation's got to be a part of it. And so I've got sort of what do we do? Nonviolent communication as a means of healing. And that's a sheet from nonviolent communication. Nonviolent communication is a tool. And our tools can be used well. And anyone who has first started learning how to hammer knows that tools can be handled badly. I worked in an ER, and the number of tool oopsies was just unbelievable. So nonviolent communication is a tool for healing. We need political action. We need some people out there marching and making a lot of noise. We need prophetic calls. And I think one of the things that when I was a professor here, adjunct, assistant professor, visiting, different title for every semester, I was able to use my prophetic voice a lot. We need that. We need translators, and that's what I do a lot now. This is like that. Remember when the church forced you out because you didn't put enough money in the plate? They're being pushed out because of who they are. Do you remember how you felt? Yeah, that's over some money. Imagine how they feel. So I translate. I take scripture and I talk about here is the context it was in then. How might it apply to the context we're in now? We need people running for office. We need people running at local levels for office because I don't care where you are on the political spectrum. I suspect we're all, of course, sort of in a very similar place. But we really have got a lot of bad options out there. Run for office. Start small and run. Be engaged. And then vote. One of the disappointments is how often people who are so passionate about a cause, it's like the Dallas Cowboys trying to play football. They just can't finish the game. So I've been out of football since Kaepernick. So that boycott really hurt me. But I suspect Dallas is the same now as it has been. Just can't finish the game. You got to finish the game. You got to go and vote. It's got to be all of it. What else do we need? And this is where I want to talk to you guys to talk. Because I have no idea. Seems like I've been up here 3 hours. Woohoo!
Here is actually to facilitate the conversation, so
Yes.
I'm going to jump in. So Ms. Easterwood, who's up in the front there, who's the administrative assistant for philosophy and religious studies, and also one
Yay! I know.
to facilitate our discussion based on these topics today. So if you want, you can see up there, or if you just want to have it around your chair, either way, whatever we feel comfortable.
You slide, cause that chair is deep. Everyone's in here. Like you go.
No, I just want to say thank you so much for that. But also, I just wanted to add one note, and I think that this points at something, but I'm not sure exactly how, because what you said about the litter boxes, it's not just a hoax. I mean, it is
Right.
distortion, right?
Yeah.
But there actually is at least one school district that has
Okay.
litter.
Okay.
And it's the district in Colorado where Columbine High School is. And
Interesting.
it's there in case of a shooter, in case of an active shooter situation that goes on so long
Yeah.
that these kids that are stuck
That's
somewhere have to use the bathroom and can't.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's like thinking about the just, I mean, I think at a human level, yes.
Yeah.
We need to understand, we need to care, we need to listen. But at a kind of ideological level,
Yeah.
there's something purely evil about taking something like that
Yes.
and then using it the way that it's been used and
Yeah.
misused. And I just wanted to
Yes.
say that.
Yes, you're right. You're right. Because we do take things, so there is real malice out there. There are, there are people playing realpolitik. But we need to be aware that there are people out there manipulating instead of reacting to what we think is, something going on down the road. I mean, understanding the context of it is vital. Thank you.
I was just gonna open it up. I seen you first. Let's go there.
I just wanted to ask a question about anxiety.
Sure.
So, one of the appeals, I think at least, of authoritarian politics is that it creates a great deal of security. You know,
Yeah.
like I know where I am.
Yeah.
You know, I know where everyone else is. And so in that sense, at least I see political forms like democracy as inherently kind of anxiety producing.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to know kind of how that fit in with your framework, because you mentioned like dissolving anxiety
Yeah.
and sitting
Right.
as a non-anxious presence.
You know, and that's just real. Part of it is that recognizing that authoritarian forms give the illusion of stability when they're just not. I mean, and this is where the translation comes in. Going back and recognizing that everything Jesus said was political within an environment that had basically zero social mobility. And the day-to-day lives of people, you know, it was really horrific. And so there's something radical about blessed are the poor in spirit, but then when you look at Luke and it's blessed are the poor, you've got to, then you start with the healing, is recognizing, because so often think about the things that are running through our heads. Not good enough, not good enough. You know, I'm too fat, I'm too thin, I'm too this, I'm too that. And if I get the right combination of product, you know, the insecurities are making people money, and those people are not us. So, you know, whether it's late stage capitalism, whether it's, you know, the neo-fascism or what have you, stability is an illusion. Unless it's a race to the bottom where we're all destitute, if that's the sort of stability we're hoping for. And I just don't think that's it. But, you know, we go from one group being scapegoated to the next. We see how that played out. So yeah, I do think that there are, to me, the deeper danger for democracy is the fact that we are exhausted and we have the mistaken notion that voting is enough, instead of realizing what democracy requires of us. And honestly, very few of us want to do it. I love it and I don't want to do it. You know? I mean, most people don't love sitting down and looking through let me read the congressional record tonight. That sounds like great fun. We don't do what we need to do to be informed. But that's what democracy requires of us. So I think rather than stability, it is that we don't want to be part of actually being aware enough and engaged enough to do democracy well.
So in your talk, you talked a lot about sort of building new communities that sort of are healthy and can deal with this sort of trauma. And specifically, you talked a lot about religious communities.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what you would say to people who think religion is just inherently bad and divisive.
Yeah.
That religion caused the Crusades, it caused the colonization of America,
Sure.
It has been the leading cause of the reactionary forces in America. I was just wondering how you would respond to that.
I don't think we have a healthy thing to fill that vacuum if it disappears. Is kind of a short answer. I think that one of the problems is that we sort of have a one size fits all understanding of religion, and so it's interesting to me. And again, you know, to a great extent, I was no different. Whether you're in a religious community or are fleeing a religious community, the overwhelming tendency is to see scripture in a literalist, fundamentalist way. And that's a new phenomenon. I mean, historically, that is not how the Bible is written. I mean, you know, it's like what I said about nonviolent communication. Any tool can be used badly. And throughout history, religion has been used badly. But I don't think it's inherently evil. I do think that you find what you're looking for when you read the text. And I think that in a healthy way, if we look at the way that the Gospels, the Gospel writers, each of them found something different in the person of Jesus, and that's why you have very different, the blessed of the poor in spirit versus blessed are the poor. Luke was overwhelmingly interested in the real world. I mean, it was the shepherds who first heard of the birth in this narrative. Read Mary's Magnificat. There are reasons why union workers and radicals go to Luke. And then you've got John, who's esoteric and, Greek philosophy shooting through. Greek philosophy is everywhere, but especially prominent there. Each of the writers of those texts had a different need that was being met, a different presentation of the sacred. But when we come to it, because so often we're coming to it in 2023 or 1973 or whenever, we're coming at it after this kind of takeover of a literalist vision. And that just isn't historically accurate. But it is a tool that has been misused, as every tool is misused. For me, it is as often, hopefully, a tool of healing. So, for instance, without King's vision, I don't know how many, and the religious relationship that he had with his followers, the spiritual relationship, I don't know how many people walked the walk that they walked. He used that tool for good. He used it well. So I think that for every horrific thing, every crusade, we've got to, Martin Luther King Jr.
Does anyone else have a question?
What does a healthy community then say when someone says, love the sinner, hate the sin?
Well, I think that you start by saying, what on earth do you mean by that? And maybe you go to one of those clobber verses that where it seems like it's attacking homosexuals, and really it's a setup for a following verse that always gets left out, which is, who among you has done any better? To start that conversation of, can you, if you're framing someone as a sinner, judgment is God's. If you want to step into that language, as I tell my congregation,
Well, I know,
that's
but my
right.
Parents love to. So,
Oh yeah, I know, yeah. Generational trauma, family dynamics, yes. But so if we start with problematizing, casting people as, you are this sinner because of this thing, but let's look at all of these various verses. So, I did a sermon the other day where I looked at, I began it by saying, I'm standing before you committing an abomination. And of course, everybody's like, ooh. It's like, because I don't know what these clothes are made of, but I guarantee you there's mixed cloth in here somewhere. Do you want to run through all of those various items? Do we want a 700-point checklist here? Or do we want to start in this moment of grace and then talk about what it means and how these different rules and regulations are categorized and what they might have been getting at? Why this might have been an issue or that. And that ultimately what you see is an ongoing opening of the table. Instead of, because for every love the sinner, hate the sin, hey, that's above my pay grade. But we're told, judgment is God's, not ours. And then I'll pull out Matthew 25 and say, okay, we're going to talk about judgment. Here is the example of Jesus, on the seat of judgment. Does anybody know what he judges by? Because it's not any of the lists that I grew up with, your dancing or drinking or all the rest. Do you know what we're judged on in Matthew 25?
Right?
Well,
Love God.
that's a different verse, but that's what we're told to do. And Jesus is quoting the Hebrew Bible for that. The new part is love as I have loved. But Matthew 25 is where the sheep and the goats are separated solely upon how well did you love? How well did you care? Did you visit the prisoner? Did you feed the hungry? Did you give drink to the thirsty? It's what you did to the least of these, you did to me. That's the judgment. That's a judgment you build a community on. That's a judgment you build a family on and relationships on. Is, do we care for those around us, especially the least of these? So when I do communion, the UCC has an open table. Everyone's welcome. And I start by just a statement of, assuming that you are believing this story. You have the guy that doubts him, all of them doubted him at one point. But you've got the person who denied him, the one who betrayed him, and he fed them. That's it. So what kind of sin are you talking about? The sin that happens to be in a whole laundry list that catches all of us? Because that's where those verses show up. You drink too much, you sleep around. Okay, every example of those clobber verses are surrounded by text that catch every one of us. And they're followed by a statement that, you do know better, person I'm talking to. It's about recognizing our connectedness and putting ourselves in a relationship with one another. So that's how I'd start. And I pair it with, people who say, why don't you preach against homosexuality? It's like, well, are you homosexual? No? Then why would you want to hear about somebody else's sin? Let's talk about yours. Which one do you want me to talk about? Because this is about healing and growth. Deepening your spiritual walk. That means I need to be talking about your problem. If you're going to bring me into this,
I think we have a time for maybe one more question. Yeah.
Oh, I got it? Okay. I was just wondering, so we talk a lot about building, communities that are more positive, but I was wondering what to do with the sort of communities and relationships we already have that aren't rooted in religion, and I was wondering how to help those move from a more literal definition to a more contextual metaphorical view.
Sure. So for instance, let's just say the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. which is one that people, and they tend to ignore what Ezekiel says about the reason that Sodom was sinful, which had nothing to do with homosexuality, but had to do with hard-heartedness, because they weren't caring for the widows and orphans and all that. Well, they skipped that part in Ezekiel, and they stick with that. And I talk about a spectrum of hospitality. So you have to back it up. So you have Abraham, who sees these strangers in the distance and hops out and he runs to them. And he brings them to his tents. He welcomes them. He bathes their feet. He says, let me get you a bite. And then he ends up killing, I can't remember if it was a lamb or a calf, can't remember, it's been a while. But he offers them a bite and feeds them a feast. And then he walks them to the edge of his property. He cares for them extravagantly. And then you see Lot's at the gate, and they show up, and he's like, hey, well, yeah, you want to stay at my place? Okay, well, I'll give you a feast. It ends up being unleavened bread. It's sort of a meh moment. He's doing the bare minimum until the people of Sodom show up and offer the opposite extreme from Abraham, which is, while Abraham was extravagant in his welcome, the people of Sodom were extreme in their lack of welcome, their lack of hospitality. And so I translated, and all of these stories. And so then I asked him, I said, where do you find yourself? Because honestly, more often than not, I'm thinking I'm sitting there with Lot. I mean, I freak out if somebody tries to break my door down to kill them. But, my great-grandfather was extravagant in his welcome. That's who I want to live up to. But more often than not, I'm with Lot. Why? Because I'm busy. I'm tired. Juggling too much. We need more self-care. We need more personal healing. So, because without that, we're not going to have the space to build community. Because what we really want is a nap. That's just real. It's hard to build healthy communities when we aren't getting enough rest. So those are the things I start with. And I try to tell the stories in the context of where we are. And I'm doing that in churches. I think we all can do that. But that's what makes democracy hard, because we've actually got to do it. And unfortunately, that means not enough naps. And waking up at 3 a.m. wondering, am I doing anything good here? And then having somehow the ability to reset and say, yeah. And if I'm not making good out there, at least I'm healing myself. And I hope that a healed version of me will produce its consequences in the world around me.
Thank you.
Thank God.
Thank you so much for coming tonight, and thank you so much for Reverend Dr. Jeffcoat. We have some upcoming events and also opportunities to actually make sure that you are getting care in your community. So November 14th, there is going to be a free clothing giveaway for gender inclusive clothing and clothing for international students particularly, and anybody who might need some clothing for our colder weather. So please keep a lookout for that. So that's all kind of related to some of the work that we're doing through the Lavender Library as well. And Dr. Paige Rose is helping to facilitate that. On the other hand, you want to provide some care for the community. We're also accepting donations to be able to build up some resources to pass out to folks. So let me know if you've got something, if you've got a sweater that you don't use anymore, bring it on by. We'll pass it along to somebody else who needs that sweater for this upcoming season. But a really great way to showcase and highlight some of that care that we've been talking about in transforming your community. I also wanted to let you know that our final speaker of this series for this fall semester is going to be coming on December 6th, also 6th, also in this space. And at that event, we're going to be talking a little bit more about psychology. So the speaker is actually someone who's both a philosopher and a psychoanalyst. And he is going to be coming. He's originally from Arkansas, teaches at the University of Pittsburgh now. And he's going to be talking a little bit about his experiences of being able to do that kind of internal work, and the psychoanalytic investigations of the internal work, and then also what that means for liberating in terms of queer theory. So we're kind of continuing on some of these same themes. So keep a lookout for that. Make sure that you come to that event as well. And join me again. And thank you, Dr. Jeffcoat.
Thank you.